Michael Pollan has spent the better part of a decade trying to get us back in touch with food. Real food, that is, not Twinkies, to understand better what we are putting in our mouths. His most recent book takes us into the kitchen and a world where the lost art of cooking could bring us back to the basics. For more on this world, here is Michael Pollan, author of Cooked, A Natural History of Transformation. And we welcome you back to TVO. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be here.
Well, we have talked about your other books in the past on this program. Omnivore's Dilemma, you looked at the agricultural industry, where food comes from, food rules, in defense of food, you looked at the science of nutrition, and now cooking, which I know is a journey you didn't think you'd take. So why are you on it?
Well, you know, I've been looking at the food system, the whole chain from earth to body, and along the way I kept getting these clues that one of the most influential links in the food chain is the transformations of stuff coming off farms into delicious and nutritious, or the opposite, kinds of meals. And that it was cooking, or the lack of cooking, that was influencing what was happening down on the farm, in that to the extent we outsource our cooking to corporations, we are going to have a very large industrialized agriculture. And so that the cook is influencing the nature of agriculture in a way I didn't appreciate. And this renaissance of small farming and farmers markets and CSAs really did depend on people buying directly from farmers, which is to say raw ingredients, which is to say cooking. So I realized that we weren't going to solve the agriculture problem if we weren't going to cook anymore. And then on the other end, as I looked at the science of nutrition, it gradually became clear that the key issue wasn't so much nutrients, good and bad, or even the calorie count. It was really the most important thing about your diet is it being cooked by a human being or is it being cooked by a corporation? And if it's being cooked by a corporation, chances are you're struggling. You're eating too much, you're struggling with type 2 diabetes, and are likely to end up with chronic diseases. Because corporate cooked food, which we call processed food, essentially, is cooked with way too much salt, fat, and sugar, and lots of dubious food additives. And they also cook kinds of foods that you don't want to be eating every day, like French fries. By
using the word corporations, though, I am inferring from that there is something very political in the agenda that's behind this book. Is that fair to say?
Well, I'm pretty open about it. I mean, I do say that cooking is a political act, and I mean a couple things by that. One is it's a very good way to vote for the kind of agricultural system you want to see. That the cook has power that the eater of processed food does not. When you buy processed food, it's a black box in terms of what kind of farming it came from. I mean, it's no wonder you end up with horse meat and hamburgers in Europe, as we did, or pink slime in America in our food, because they don't really have to disclose much about where the food came from, just the ingredient list. Whereas if you're a cook, you can decide to buy grass-fed beef, you can decide to buy organic, you can decide to buy local, whatever it is you want, whatever matches your values. But all that becomes opaque. I'll give you an example. In the US, if you buy fish in the market and it's imported from China, say, tilapia, you must disclose this food was grown in China. Some people have reservations about food grown in China, and for good reason, because they've had lots of scandals around contamination. But once that fish is turned into a fish stick, they no longer have to disclose where it came from, which is why lots of Chinese food now ends up in processed food. So it's a political vote you have. That's what I mean by saying it's a political act. It's political in one other sense, too. It is a way, I think, to, by cooking, by growing a little of our own food, we can, in effect, protest the commercialization of every nook and cranny of our lives, which is going on right now. And I think it's kind of great to keep a little space around ourselves that isn't commercialized, that we still control.
I still want to know a little more about how you got to this, though. And I gather, I mean, are you one of these guys who watches all these celebrity chef shows and enjoys that realm of it?
Well, I do a little bit. I had a period of watching cooking shows on television intensely, and actually that was another important clue to what was going on here for me. And I was asked to write a piece by the New York Times about this fad of TV cooking shows, so I spent a month watching them intensively. And at the same time, I began learning about how much we're not cooking in reality. So that rates of home cooking have fallen by about half in the United States in the last 20 or 30 years. And at the same time, amount of time spent watching cooking on television has soared. So there are tens of millions of us who spend more time watching other people cook on television than cook themselves. And I don't have to tell you that the food you watch being cooked on television, you never get to eat.
How does that make sense exactly, that we apparently have the time to watch other people cook, but not
we don't
ourselves?
have time in our own lives? Well, I call it the cooking paradox, and it's something I tried to unpack in this book. I think there are a couple things going on. One is, though, that cooking seems to be different than other things in our everyday lives that we've outsourced. So we no longer fix our cars ourselves. We no longer make our own clothing, for the most part. But we don't watch TV shows about this. Cooking is different. I think cooking goes really deep. I think we all have memories from our childhood, very, very warm memories of our childhood of being cooked for by our parents or our grandparents, watching these transformations unfold in the kitchen, which are kind of miraculous to a kid. I mean, I remember watching my mother scramble eggs. And I thought that it was the most amazing process in the world. You took this yellow goop and suddenly it turned into these delicious gold nuggets. And kids love transformation, and that's what happens in the kitchen. And so that's one thing. But the other thing is, as I studied the older history of cooking, I came to see that it's really key to who we are as a species. It's really central. Cooking made us human. We are the cooking animal. That's what we do. And that has been true for a very long time. So I think we watch cooking shows in part because we miss cooking in our lives. I think we really do. Even as we tell ourselves we don't have time and we eat out and we buy processed food, there's something about it we kind of sense is right and beautiful, and we miss. Now, these shows are giving us a vicarious experience of cooking, but I actually think they're not encouraging us to cook, because they make cooking look really hard.
Well, you've got to be a superstar to do what they do, right? So we don't see ourselves that way.
We don't, and it looks dangerous, and there's a time clock, it's pressured, it's competitive, it's like sports. And so, in a sense, they preach a kind of leave it to the professionals ethos, and I think that's really destructive. And there's a sense in which this whole fetishization of food and cooking and celebrity chefs, it's good on the one hand in that it's elevating cooking in the conversation. It's bad on the other hand in that it's eroding our confidence in the kitchen. There are many people who don't think they can cook because they can't cook like that.
I want to put a fairly provocative theory on the table and have you comment on it, and let's see how we do with this. There will be those who will say one of the reasons we spend a lot less time in the kitchen is because of feminism. Women are not available to run the home like they used to. They're off there in the workplace, of course, like everybody else, and as a result, when they get home, they don't have the patience, they don't have the time, they don't have... Anyway. Yeah. Do you like that argument?
No, it's not quite right. To blame feminism for the collapse of cooking isn't really fair. There is a role that feminism played in this history, but it unfolded a little differently, and I tell that history in the book. Basically, the food industry has been trying to get into our kitchens and into our dining rooms for a very long time, for more than 100 years. The reason being that the more you process food, the more profitable it is. Any farmer will tell you it's very hard to sell whole foods. The margins are really small. But the more you add value to them in the form of convenience or processing, the more profitable it becomes. So the food industry has seen this as a very important market. And they were kind of resisted for a long time. Many women would tell market researchers, this is pre-60s, say, they would say, where I need help in the kitchen is with the cleaning, not with the cooking. The cooking is my creative outlet. I enjoy cooking. So there was a lot of resistance. After World War II, the industry redoubled their efforts. They had invented all these amazing products for the war effort under contract to the Pentagon. Freeze-dried food, very simulated foods, instant coffee, powdered spam, powdered, that may go back older, I'm not sure. Powdered orange juice and concentrated orange juice, all these great technologies to feed the troops in the field and keep them healthy. And they wanted very much to take those products and sell them to the American household post-war. They got their opportunity, as you suggested, when women entered the workforce and the feminist revolution hit. Those two things go together, not completely. Some women entered the workforce because they wanted to, others had to because wages were declining in the United States beginning in the 70s. So you needed two salaries to keep a family going very often. What happened though was that the feminist revolution inaugurated a very tense, awkward conversation between men and women all across North America. Basically, if we're going to be working now, we can't also be expected to clean, to cook, and do all the child care.
Need a bit of help with that second shift, if you don't mind.
Exactly right. And so there was a renegotiation of the division of labor in the House that began. It was a very tense conversation. I was party to some of those conversations.
How'd they go?
I know. They're really difficult. And that's when the food industry recognized their opening. And they began using the rhetoric of feminism to sell food. And in America, we had a big billboard campaign that Kentucky Fried Chicken took out. Giant red bucket of chicken with a two-word slogan overhead, women's liberation. So you see, it was incredibly clever. They redefined not cooking as a very progressive thing to do. And women grabbed at it, and men grabbed at it, because it let them off the hook. We'll just outsource all this work. And that's really when it begins in earnest, the move toward a fast food culture. And yes, it made it more realistic for women to work. And it did liberate some women, you could argue, but it also liberated some men. And, but the cost has been so high that we need to take a second look at that.
This is a bit cheeky of me to be quoting somebody else to you, but let me read this piece from the New York Times that appeared just a few months ago. And it's another tangent on this, about eating lonely eating, in fact. In a real-life study of middle-aged and older adults in the Chicago area, University of Chicago psychologist Dr. Cacioppo and colleagues found that those who scored high on the UCLA loneliness scale, a widely used psychological assessment, ate substantially more fatty foods than those who scored low. Quote, "Is it any wonder that we turn to ice cream or other fatty foods when we're sitting at home feeling all alone in the world?" Dr. Cacioppo said. "We want to soothe the pain we feel by mainlining sugar and fat content to the pleasure centers of the brain, and absent of self-control, we go right at it." Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does, actually. I mean, people medicate with food all the time, and carbohydrates are really one of the ways you do it. You get a boost from carbohydrates, and that's why they're, you know, said to be addictive, because you then crash and you need more of them. Eating alone very often can be unhealthy eating, because you eat more mindlessly. If it's the only thing going on, you tend to eat while you're doing something else, watching television or on the computer or reading, and you just kind of mindlessly ingest. You know, there are more single-person households now today, and that's part of the problem with home cooking, and one of the reasons it's decreased. It's very hard to cook for yourself, for one. Cooking is, by its nature, a social act. But I suggest to people that it becomes a way to bring people to you, and that cooking together, that singles, you know, I was in London, and I was talking to someone who says, well, I live alone, but we have a soup club. I said, what is that? So, well, we get together once a month, and we all make soup, and we each make a different soup, and we exchange portions. We have, you know, single portions, pints of soup, and we each get one of, you know, we pass them around. So we leave the club, and we each have 6 portions of soup and 6 new recipes. And so using food as a social tool, as a community building tool, which of course it's been used for thousands of years, is one good way to deal with that phenomenon. In general, when you eat with other people, you don't eat as much, and you eat with a little more care. And in fact, one of my food rules is, you know, try to avoid eating alone if you can, because you'll tend to eat a little bit more thoughtlessly and a little bit more.
I'm trying to remember your 7 famous words. Don't tell me, don't tell me. Eat food, as opposed to crap.
Good.
Eat food, not too much, mostly plants.
You got
Am I close?
Yeah, no, you nailed it. And I would add now, and to the extent you can, cook it yourself.
And cook it yourself. Let's do the 4 transformations here, shall we? Because I think this is you speak of thousands of years ago. We've kind of been doing it this way for a very long time. Fire, water, air, fermentation. You want to take us through the 4?
Sure. Well, you know, I was trying to come up with a division that all cooking, I wanted to simplify cooking. I wanted to get down to the essentials of what this is, which whenever I'm writing about something, that's my first move, is like, let's get down to the basics. And what are we talking about here? And I discovered you could divide all cooking, and when I say all, advisedly, you can come up with exceptions, I'm sure, into 4 big transformations. The first and oldest is cooking with fire. This appears to go back as much as 1.9 million years ago, okay, to a time before we were Homo sapiens. We were still somewhere between Homo habilis and Homo erectus. And when we discovered the power of fire and what it could do to food, it changed the course of our evolution and indeed made us who we are, made us humans. There is a point at which we diverge from the other apes, and our brains get much larger and more complex, and our guts get much smaller, the length of our gastrointestinal tract, and our jaws get smaller. What allowed this to happen? Because it's a central watershed event in our evolution. It appears it was cooked food. When you cook food, you are in effect externalizing a certain part of digestion. You're beginning the breakdown process outside of the body. What that means is your body doesn't have to work as hard to break down the food. You don't have to chew as much to break down the food, so you don't need as big a jaw. And you get this incredible boon in calories because you're not spending so much time processing the food. It was this boon in calories that underwrote the expansion of the human brain and the shrinking of the jaws and the gut, although our guts are now going the other way, getting a little bit bigger. So this was a big deal, and it is probably, again, this is a hypothesis. It was first put forward by Richard Wrangham, who's a primatologist and anthropologist at Harvard. But it's gradually becoming accepted that this was the turning point that made us who we are as a species. So when Charles Lamb and others have said that we were the cooking animal, they were more right than they knew. We are the animal that cooks. There is an exception that I'll get to. There is an animal I found that does cook also, but in a different way. But the discovery of fire to cook food also leads to something else, which is the meal. Before we were cooking, animals just would eat when they found food, as most animals do today. But when you cook, suddenly you have a need for cooperation. It's a social event. Someone has to tend the fire, keep it going, while someone else is preparing the meat or hunting or whatever it is. And then you have this group of animals around this fire cooking, and you need some rules to govern their behavior. Because otherwise, the biggest, toughest, greediest one is going to grab the food before it's done. So suddenly you need social rules. Manners, if you will. Yeah, exactly. Although I have a feeling they were a little, tougher than that at the beginning. So you have the need for language to navigate this complex new social formation called the meal, which, along with cooking, is also in danger today. And so that's cooking with fire. And to learn how to do that, I wanted to find the most kind of basic, unreconstructed fire cooking still going on in the world today. And I found it in eastern North Carolina, where there was a school of barbecue, and the South has got many different schools of barbecue. But this one is whole hog barbecue over a wood fire, very slow, very simple. All you do is salt your pig, put it on a fire, keep the temperature low, let it go for about 15, 20 hours. You can add a little salt and vinegar at the end. It's a very simple, very beautiful kind of cooking, and it produces delicious food. And so I worked with these pit masters to learn their trade, learn how they did it, and learn the secrets of barbecue, which it turns out there is no secret to barbecue. It's really simple. Men have been overcomplicating grilling for many, many years.
To impress women.
To impress women, yeah. Grilling, even backyard barbecuing, is all about self-dramatizing men, and as it has ever been. So that was the first kind of cooking that I looked at, cooking with fire.
How about water?
Oldest. Water is, what I mean by water, and each one is named for one of the classical elements, is cooking in pots over fire. This becomes a radical advance over cooking directly with fire, and it can't happen until you have the technology of fired clay, earthenware pots, to hold the water and survive the flames. But when you can boil liquid in a pot, it opens up all these new culinary possibilities. Suddenly you can soften grain, and therefore you can grow grain, which is a very compact, energy-dense form of food. You really can't have agriculture till you have cooking in pots. It also allows you to meld flavors in a way you never could before, and so you get cuisine at this point. This happens 10,000 years ago. If you think about cooking meat over fire, it's kind of the same anywhere you go in the world. And if you had a blindfold on, you couldn't tell if you were in Argentina or North Carolina or Canada or anywhere. It's just like meat over a fire. As soon as you're cooking with these plants and animals in these pots, you have these flavor principles that arise depending on what plants are available in different places. So if you're in Asia, that base flavor of ginger and garlic and scallion tells you where you are. Or if you're in France, it's mirepoix, which is just, you know, onions and carrots and celeries. So whatever aromatic vegetables you're using starts defining the food geographically. The advantages of cooking in pots is that you waste nothing. Cooking over fire, you're dripping onto the fire. You're losing lots of fat and other nutrients. You preserve everything in a pot, with the result that you get to invent this incredible thing called sauce. You don't have sauces till you have pots. And the last benefit of cooking with pots, and why it's such an important innovation, is that you can keep people alive much longer. In that, before you could make soft foods like porridges and soups and stews, when you lost your teeth, you were dead, literally. So now you can extend the human lifespan, and it happens as soon as you start cooking with pots. Plus, you can wean babies earlier. You have a soft food you can put them on. So mothers are freed of babies earlier, which allows them to have more babies and expands the human population. So this simple thing, cooking in a pot, turns out to be profound impact. And I use that chapter. I trained under a chef named Samin Nosrat, an Iranian-American who is a beautiful cook, Chez Panisse trained, and she taught me how to make what are called grandma dishes. So I went from the male realm of barbecue to the more female realm of domestic cooking. And that's where I kind of learned about braises and stews and soups, and actually the most practical things that I learned were learned there.
Believe it or not, we are down to about 4 minutes left. This half hour has just flown by, and we've still got to cover air and fermentation.
All right, I'm going to move.
So
I'm going to cook. Okay. So the next one is air. 6,000 years ago, some Egyptian noticed that his porridge left in the corner of a room was starting to bubble, and it was fermenting. And he put it in an oven, and it got big. This miracle of expanding food. And it turned out that bread was significantly more nutritious than the porridge from which it was made, in effect. And why that is that the sourdough microbes that ferment bread before we had yeast actually changed the structure of the proteins and the carbohydrates and the minerals to make them much more accessible. And then cooking it in the loaf becomes kind of a pressure cooker, and it steams inside, gets much hotter than the boiling point, and that breaks down the carbohydrates, makes them tasty and delicious. So bread is a huge advance over just kind of wet grain.
And that goes back how far?
6,000 years.
6,000.
In Egypt, it appears. And you know, for most of European history, more than half the calories in the diet was simply bread. It kept us alive. And I learned how to bake bread with some wonderful bakers, and found out I really loved baking bread, that it was incredibly sensual, beautiful process. Last section.
Fermentation.
Yeah, possibly the most fascinating of all. Cooking without the use of any heat whatsoever. Cooking with the use of microbes, bacteria and fungi, allows us to make fermented vegetables, sauerkraut, kimchi,
booze,
pickles. Booze, yeah, it gives us alcohol, this amazing thing. Saccharomyces cerevisiae, the little yeast that is responsible for bread, is also responsible for booze. I think this yeast is man's best friend. It does much more for us than the dog. But of course, since we can't see it, we don't express our appreciation in the same way. And cheese, fermented milk. All these things are kind of partially rotted foods, essentially. They're guided decomposition. And give us some of the strongest, most interesting flavors, not to mention this molecule with the power to change what goes on in our heads, all through bacteria.
And I guess the fact that you've still got a loaf of Wonder Bread, which you purchased when?
The day they went bankrupt. I think it was in December or January, yeah. And I bought one just for old time's sake, and it's still soft.
Which shows there's not a lot of fermentation going on inside that package.
No, there's about 30 different ingredients. It's pretty far removed from the Egyptian bread I was describing, and a whole lot less nutritious as well.
Now, in the back of the book, you've got a bunch of recipes.
Well, not a bunch, 4. One for each transformation.
Fair enough, yes, that's true. These are not simple recipes.
No.
These are very time-consuming recipes. Are you concerned that by putting those in the book the way you did, you're making it harder for us to follow what you want us to do?
Well, you know, this is not a book of 20-minute recipes to get you in the kitchen.
Right.
This is a book to reacquaint you with the wonders of these everyday objects, cheese and bread and grilled meat, and learn how they are done when they are done in the most traditional, authentic way possible. This is not how I cook every day either. These were adventures, and this is an adventure story. But I think that knowing about how bread is made or how beer is made can inform your everyday cooking also. There's many kinds of extreme cooking in here that just is for the pleasure of learning how to do it once or twice because you learn how to appreciate these things. But I'm hoping that what I do will inform everyday cooking. That learning about the story of barbecue, you will season your meat more successfully and not rush it on the grill and kind of learn what's happening to meat when it's on fire and how to manipulate that process. So I think it's important to understand that if you're looking for those 20-minute recipes to help you get in the kitchen, you know, Mark Bittman has that base covered. There are plenty of books like that. This is a kind of how to think about it book, and I'm hoping it will inspire you. The only reason I put those recipes in it is that I was afraid that people would be inspired to try those really ambitious recipes, and indeed they have been. People have been emailing me pictures of their loaves of bread since it came out, which is great, but you know, is not the idea. They're just there if you want to try it, and they are. I mean, making bread from scratch, starting your own sourdough starter, it's not hard, but it's going to take some time.
Well, I guess if this were a meal in Italy, we would call this the prima piatti and maybe the insalata. But we still need to have the main course and dessert. So we come back tomorrow and we'll do this again?
Sounds good. I'd be happy to.
Michael Pollan has been our guest. His new book, Cooked, A Natural History of Transformation, and we've just set the table. Michael Pollan.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.